Tony Wellington, welcome to Coffee Chats. Tony Wellington, welcome to Coffee Chats.
Thanks a lot, Matt.
Mate, great to have you on the show today. Thanks for your time. Now, this has been a bit of a whirlwind for you over the last few weeks. I certainly appreciate you having a bit of a chat to us today. But, mate, first and foremost, are you a coffee man, Tony Wellington?
Look, I'm going to disappoint you terribly here, Matt, because I actually don't drink coffee at all.
You're not?
So I think we're actually not having a coffee chat. We're having a tea chat or something.
I see. Well, thanks for your time anyway, mate.
If I drink coffee, I start to feel nauseous and spin out. So I learned to avoid it early on.
So how do you start the day?
How
do you survive, Tony?
Without artificial stimulants, I guess is the answer.
Is it tea or what would you normally have?
Look, at breakfast I have water, to tell you the truth. I will have 1 or 2 cups of tea, usually herbal tea or something through the day. I gave up alcohol a couple of years ago, so I don't drink that at all. So I'm a bit boring in that regard. I'm sorry.
Would you say you're very health conscious?
Well, no. We've spoken before about a sort of health incident that I had a couple of decades ago, which made me aware of what I do to my body. But no, it's all about trying to maintain a reasonable frame of mind. And I really gave up alcohol because working as a mayor was so time-consuming, so energy-draining. And then if I used alcohol in the evening to calm down, then I didn't feel fresh when I woke up in the morning. Sure. So I thought, well, I can do better than this. I'll just stop altogether. So I went cold turkey and I haven't missed it.
We have spoken about it, but I'm interested, when you did go cold turkey, I know you said you didn't miss it, but did your body miss it? Was there a part of you that missed the alcohol?
Oh, look, I miss the effect that alcohol can have, and it is such an immediate effect of calming one's nerves, but it is so short-lived, and there's a price to pay for that, and it's just not worth paying the price as far as I'm concerned. I'm not a wowser. I'm not going to proselytise to others about whether or not they should be drinking. That's entirely up to them. My wife enjoys a glass of wine each night, and that's fine. But I find it that I function better without it, let's say.
You mentioned then your role as mayor, which in the last couple of days has sadly come to an end, or maybe it wasn't a sad thing, I'm not sure. How has
you want a response to that?
No, not at all. No. I'm just being very particular with my questioning here, Tony. How has the last few days been for you? I don't want to ask about the whole campaigning because I know that's a whole different world in itself. But the last few days, especially since conceding defeat to Clare Stewart, how's the feelings been?
Oh, look, it's an emotional roller coaster, and particularly after a campaign, which is a very intense period. What I found was I thought I was doing really well, and then I went in to clear out my office and take away my personal stuff from the office. And halfway through that process, suddenly I started to feel nauseous, and I suddenly realised that there's still some emotional work to be done. But look, it's up and down. There are regrets, but there's also new opportunities now.
You mentioned regrets. So I've got to ask about them. What are some of the biggest regrets?
Oh, obviously, if I was able to continue as mayor for another term, there are projects which I would have liked to see to fruition. We were on a wonderful trajectory, I think, with council. Obviously, each mayor brings a certain flavour to the council. Hopefully, my legacy will be largely positive.
When the vote was so close, and for those that are outside the region and may not know, it was sitting, you'd be in front, maybe 51 to 49, then it would swap, and it was pretty much 50-50 all the way through. Was that a surprise to you when you first saw the numbers coming in like that?
Look, one always hopes for the best, but there are all sorts of extenuating circumstances, and everyone will have their own theory about why a vote went a particular way, just as we do at federal and state level. But there were some circumstances beyond my control during particularly the last year I was in office, and they involved 2 other male councillors and certain behaviour of theirs, which ended up with one of them in jail. That sort of thing stains a council, it damages people's confidence in a council, even though I didn't elect them, obviously. The populace elected them, and they chose their own behaviour, but nevertheless, it's not an easy thing to overcome. So that may be part of it. In the end, I think that because of that behaviour, some people in the public wanted a change of sex, if you like, at the top. And certainly wanted more female representation. And it looks like there'll be 3 out of 7 of the councillors plus mayor will be female, and that's a good thing. That's a better, more representational council anyway.
You mentioned that the 2 male councillors, and we won't go into the who's or what's or any of that in this conversation, but I would disagree, because I saw it as an outsider looking in, and Noosa got not the type of attention we wanted, but Noosa got national attention because of some of those actions. But what we saw was your face, and we saw your name on the screen. And, this is a pat on the back to you. I think you dealt with that situation quite well. Run me through that sort of time. Like, what sort of thoughts did you have? Did you have to go in and really play the card of, this shouldn't be about Noosa, or Noosa's still a great place? Were you going in to defend Noosa? Was that where the mindset was?
Oh, well, it was very much about defending the council and the council's reputation, as well as defending the community. Because wherever I went, those incidents, outside of Noosa, I should say, wherever I went, those incidents were on everyone's lips. I went to the state local government conference, and the only thing anyone wanted to talk to me about was the incident that hit national TV. And so, I was at pains to ensure that, I could guarantee that these were anomalies. They weren't representative of the council per se, and they certainly weren't reflective of the expectations of the community. So, there were a number of approaches I had to take, but I also had to make sure that everyone understood that none of the behaviour that was under scrutiny was acceptable.
It's one of those situations, as mayor, you kind of left to clean up the mess, even though you didn't make it in the first place. A bit like a mother in a household of children. Do you look back on that time and think you dealt with those situations well?
Look, I do think I dealt with them as well as I could have under the circumstances. The funny thing is, everyone's very clever about hindsight, and so some people were saying, well, you should have acted earlier, or you should have done this. And many people don't even understand, of course, that the mayor doesn't have the power to remove a councillor from office. They're elected by the populace. Only the local government minister can remove them. And I discussed the issues with the local government minister, of course. But it's a funny thing being mayor. There are various other issues that have come up, particularly during the campaign, which were whole of government decisions where the majority of the council made a determination. But as mayor, I wear the responsibility whether I supported the majority position or not. So that's just one of the things you have to deal with as a leader, I guess.
Let's go right back to even before mayor. I'm interested in when you first said politics was a road you wanted to go down.
I don't think I ever said that. Begrudgingly, I said, oh, all right. So I'd been involved when Noosa was threatened with amalgamation during the Beattie government. I got very involved in fighting against that push by the state government to amalgamate Noosa with what turned out to be Maroochy and Caloundra shires. And so I was on the Friends of Noosa, and then of course it happened, and with others I maintained the rage and ran a local newsletter and got involved in other committees and was on what became the Noosa Independence Alliance, which was a coalition of various local groups fighting to get council back. The funny thing was that after that first term, the first 4 years of the amalgamated council, of the two councillors on that council that represented Noosa, and neither of them were vociferously pushing for de-amalgamation. And in fact, the one in the division that I live in was violently opposed to de-amalgamation and said, you know, that it would never happen and it was a stupid idea. So I felt a sense of responsibility, in fact, after all the work that so many in the community had put in to stand against that particular councillor. And as it turns out, I managed to get elected. I was the only person on that council to defeat a sitting councillor. So then I was thrown
at that
into
point,
the
Tony, let me just
council.
can I just jump in quickly? Bob Abbott's role at that time, was he mayor back then?
So he was mayor for the first 4 years. The election that I stood for, he retired from his position, and that was the election that Mark Jamieson was elected as mayor.
Got it. And then Bob moved in to Noosa mayor?
No. So there was no Noosa council. So for 2 years, I didn't know whether we would ever de-amalgamate, but there I was representing the northern half of Noosa on the Sunshine Coast Council. And I was a bit of a pariah there because, you know, I was the one trying to bust up the party.
Yes.
So it was a rather strange position to be in, with all the other councillors vociferously opposed to de-amalgamation occurring, and they still hold some resentment about it, some of them.
Did you feel that? Did you feel that being a pariah that back then?
Oh, absolutely. Most definitely. I found I had very little in common. I mean, we all got on professionally, you know, and I enjoyed some of their companies. But nevertheless, you know, I wanted something very different, and I had a different approach to, you know, development approvals, to transparency, etc., etc. So I was a bit of a thorn in their side, and fortunately, it was only 2 years into that 4-year term that all the planets aligned with a change of state government, and we managed to de-amalgamate. So I spent 2 years on the Sunshine Coast Council and then was re-elected as a councillor to the newly formed Noosa Council.
That whole time in Noosa's life and the Sunshine Coast and lots of others outside the area as well, de-amalgamating, making Noosa its own council again, its own shire, was huge. And as you say, you were a big voice and a big part of that happening. Can you sum that up in 30 seconds, that time in your life?
Oh, look, I think, you know, of all my achievements, and I wasn't alone, of course, you know, Noel Playford, Bob Ansett, there were many people involved in that movement, and they came and went at various times, though Bob Ansett was there right from the beginning to the very end, as were a number of others, Joanne Wright and others. It was a heady time, and really, although we succeeded, and you know, there was a very popular vote in favour in spite of a scare campaign, it was political good fortune, really, and that was that Newman was standing as the potential new premier, and we managed to get a commitment from him that if he became premier, he would allow us to de-amalgamate, or would certainly appoint a change commissioner to see whether or not that process was feasible. So we were able to hold him to his word, and it was only because, you know, the planets aligned. Glenn Elms, who was the LNP member for Noosa at the time, was supportive and managed to convince Newman as well. So it was political good fortune as much as anything. But having said that, you know, I was one of many thousands of Noosa residents who understood that what we were facing was the loss of the very things that make Noosa unique and Noosa special.
The de-amalgamation, the incidents with the two male councillors in the last 12 months, what other big challenges did you face in your time in local politics?
Look, it's a bit like herding cats when you have a group of councillors all with different personalities, different mindsets and different approaches. You have some who want to concentrate on detail and some who are only interested in the big picture, and somehow you have to try and make them all work together. So I think the biggest challenge for any mayor is to keep the councillors moving forward without it, coming to serious blows. Inevitably, blows will occur. There will be tears along the way, but trying to keep everyone focused and keep them all respectful of each other's opinion, that's the biggest goal. And at the same time, of course, remember that we were rebuilding a new council from scratch. So Noel Playford was the mayor for 2 years, and then I took over from him. But even after those first 2 years, there was still a lot of building to do. I look back over my 4 years as mayor, and we still managed to consult on and put in place some 50 new policies and strategies, over 4 years. So we also restructured the council. The development department became the environment and sustainable development department. So it had a completely different emphasis, if you like. We certainly put more emphasis on the environment over the last 4 years, particularly through climate change and various other issues. So I guess the challenge always is to bring your fellow councillors along on the ride and hope that you can share at least some of your vision with them and enthuse them about your vision, but at the same time allow them to be enthused about their personal desires and visions as well. I think a good leader is really someone who manages to allow the people around them, who often have greater expertise, and so they should, to allow them to feel good about their achievements rather than you taking their achievements away from them,
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned being a leader then, because anyone in a position of management, school teacher, principal, or in this case as mayor, you are seen as a leader. Do you see that though? Do you see yourself as a good leader?
Well, if I may be so bold, if the responses I've been getting from the staff are anything to go by, then they certainly appreciated my leadership skills. And to be honest, it's something that I've worked out over the years because I had leadership roles in various other circumstances, most particularly in the film industry, where I was either a director or a first assistant director. And the first AD is the one that runs the crew on set, so you have to have some leadership capacity. But I've also always been interested in conflict resolution and active listening and all of those sort of skills that I think good leadership really does require. So, look, I don't like blowing my own trumpet, but I think I did a reasonable job of keeping everyone enthused and allowing everyone to feel that they had their own space to take risks. And taking risks is a very important part of a bureaucracy, because most bureaucracies tend to quash risk-taking, and that's always to their detriment.
Well said. A good leader is also aware of the things they don't do so well, their faults. What would you say are your biggest faults? Have we got enough time on this show, Tony?
There are times when I can be impulsive. There are times when my humour is inappropriate. So there are times when I need to put in more effort to make sure everyone is up to speed before I drop ideas on their laps. And the other thing is I'm what I refer to as a reforming perfectionist. So I'm very hard on myself, and I'm trying to be nicer to myself. I think perfectionists are very important in our community and in our society. However, they all pay a very dear price for perfectionism, and so I'm trying to allow myself a bit more grace in making mistakes.
You're hard on yourself?
Very.
Yeah?
Extremely.
Give us an example of that.
Look, I still, I did make mistakes when I, said something to someone where I had to criticise them and I maybe did it too harshly, for example. And those sort of things still prey on my mind. You know, I am one of those people who wishes I could have done better in certain circumstances. So regrets, I've had a few, yes.
Well said, Frank. Are you someone that can say sorry when it's needed?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and I've had to do that a lot. In fact, in the last 6 months, I found that heading towards the election, and I was getting a lot of pressure. People were, put it this way, there was a concerted effort by a cohort of people in the community to unsettle me as much as possible leading up to the election by making complaints and all sorts of other things. And so I was unsettled, and therefore there were times when I maybe was a bit harsher than I needed to be, etc. So I wish my equanimity had been a little more placid during the last 6 months. But anyway, things turned out the way they did.
Well, I'm happy to talk about the campaign or not, completely up to you, but I'm interested. It definitely is a whole different world from your day-to-day being a councillor or mayor in your case. Can you share with us what the last few months has been like campaigning for council?
Well, I've done a number of campaigns now, of course. You know, twice previously for a councillor, once as a mayor, and once, of course, we had to campaign for the de-amalgamation vote, the plebiscite. So, you know, I'm a veteran, if you like, of 4 campaigns, so this was number 5. And I don't enjoy any minute of it, and not a skerrick. There's nothing I enjoy about campaigning. In this case, I made a decision that I would not critique my competitor. I would not try and demean my competitor in any way. Rather, I would just present a positive platform and continue to present a positive platform. I'm not sure that was the correct choice in the end, because, you know, I had to bite my cheek when a lot of mistruths were said about myself, about council operations, and rather than take them on and do battle over those mistruths, I put them aside and continued to offer a positive message. Whether or not that was the right approach, I'm not sure. One thing I do know, though, is that not everyone votes on the basis of policy. Not everyone votes on the basis of the character of the, you know, the candidates. There's all sorts of other factors. I read, funnily enough, during the campaign, a book by one of the insiders in Cambridge Analytica, and what's very clear is that most people vote from an emotional centre, that while they tell themselves they're voting from an intellectual position, and they're not generally. And so you can have all the policies in the world, but basically there's some elemental kind of emotional truth that people are seeking, and that's why I referred earlier to the events related to 2 male colleagues and their approach to females and how that may have played into the vote.
Do you think that's justified if people had those thoughts?
Well, not everyone engages in politics, and in a country where, you know, it's compulsory voting, they have to go out and vote whether they're engaged or not. When I first stood for the Sunshine Coast Council, I door-knocked masses of Noosa, all of Tewantin, all of Karoi, night after night for weeks and weeks and weeks. And what I discovered was that, and you know, a significant proportion, shall we say, of people can't even tell the difference between local, state and federal governments. They're just not really engaged in politics. So we've got an interesting system here, and there aren't many like it around the world, where we're forcing people who aren't even interested in politics to go out and vote. And what that does is a number of things. One is it changes the focus of what people are voting for and why they're voting. It also tends to bring two-party politics closer to the centre together, because they tend to fight over the swinging voter in the middle who's the least engaged. And I'm not sure that's always good for politics. But anyway, that's a whole other argument. We could spend hours on that one.
That's right. Well, it's quite interesting, and you're right. You know, some other countries where you don't have to vote, it's almost like you're trying to motivate people just to get them to
sign up to vote.
To sign up, right? Whereas I guess in a sense it's a positive that everyone has to vote, but like you say, a lot of people are just going in and ticking boxes willy-nilly.
And whilst it is a positive, and I understand, you know, the ideological position behind complete representation, and that's a wonderful ideology, if it's a close vote, and even at federal politics it tends to be a fairly close vote, the difference between one party or one prime minister or one mayor getting up and another can actually be the votes of the people who are the least engaged and most disinterested that count the most. And that is very odd.
And a little bit dangerous too, perhaps.
Totally. Absolutely. Completely.
Do you think that's what we saw in Noosa?
I'm not going to go there. No, the Noosa electorate are terribly engaged and very wise, of course. But, you know, of course, there are people who, and you see it when you're scrutineering, when they, you know, they scribble on the ballot form, I don't give a, you know, ... and draw pictures of genitalia and stuff, you know. There are plenty of people.
That was mine, Tony. I apologise for that.
Yours was the better drawing of
That's
them, right. The more anatomically correct. But I think that, you know, there are lots of people who go and vote begrudgingly, and they're still being forced to vote. And, you know, in a close vote, it's interesting to kind of cogitate on what sort of influence that creates.
We talk about...
Mind you have to accept the result. I'm not denying the result. You know, Clare won fair and square. That's fine. I accept that.
The numbers don't lie, yeah.
That's right.
We talk about Noosa. It is a very passionate, it is a very politically aware region, and you don't have to spend too long on social media to see that. As a journalist, I see it a lot, and as a journalist, we cop a lot of people's feedback, which isn't always positive, and you know it's part and parcel of the job. Another industry that gets a lot of feedback, quote unquote, is your good self. It just seems to be, as politicians, you're an easy scapegoat. How do you deal with that day in, day out, and what's the motivation to be the mayor, to be the leader of a region when you're getting lots of people, lots of the time having a go at you?
I'll answer it in two ways, if I may. Firstly, you know, I did it because I care passionately about the place that I live, and I want to see it succeed in its own idiosyncratic, individualistic way. But the other answer is that social media has changed the political landscape and the media landscape, as you refer to. And that's because social media has given a platform, a soapbox to people with very singular and often hateful motivations. So the bullies in our community now have a soapbox, and the bullies attract other bullies, and the bullies then create a kind of a pack mentality and go for the jugular in ways that they wouldn't do in a face-to-face context. And I can say this from very much personal experience, that some of those bullies on social media who say the most dreadful things about me, when I meet up with them in the street or at a meeting or anything like that, are sweet as pie. And yet, you know, they can make outrageous claims about, you know, my integrity, etc., on social media, which they would never say to my face. And it's really soured politics. And we go back to that issue of the people who are engaged in politics and who aren't. Many of them are being turned off because of this bullying nature, this pack mentality, on social media, that is actually putting people off engaging in politics, and that's a very sad thing. I worry about democracy. What it's done is created a firmament where you end up with populism of the sort that gets someone like Donald Trump elected, and that's scary.
Is it hard to restrain yourself from responding to some of those comments?
Oh, you can't. Some of the motivation is actually to commandeer your time. They feel that, because you'll never get the last word with these people, and there's plenty of them, and I can give you a list of names. But you know, their motivation, because they are angry people. There are people in this world, and we've all met them, who need to have something to hate, and a politician's a nice, easy, soft target to hate. And I accept that, and you have to accept that if you're going to take a public role. But the problem is that if you start to respond, they respond back, you respond, they respond back, it doesn't end, and they actually feel like they're engaging in some sort of vengeance because they've commandeered your time. They've taken your time away from your job and they've commandeered it. And if you allow that to happen, then in fact, you know, you're losing the battle and you're not doing your job effectively. So, you know, the trick is to try and determine whether or not a criticism is valid and deserves a response, rather than it just coming from a position of pure hatred without any logic, you know.
There was an incident, and before we hit record tonight, I said if there's ever any questions you don't want to talk about, that's completely fine, just let me know. This might be one of them. That there was a particular incident in this campaign that involved your wife, and we won't go into any of the detail of that, but was that a difficult time when it wasn't just about you, but an immediate member of your family to not get involved?
It was very hard not to respond, and it was very upsetting for me and even more upsetting for her. They couldn't get a rise out of me, so they attacked her, and then it snowballed again. It's this whole pack thing, so that others then came on and started to critique my wife over stupid little things. She has a pair of gumboots that's one green and one red, and she loves wearing them when it's wet. Yeah. And it's her idea of, you know, of an amusing piece of apparel. And instead that became a focus on social media, and they were criticising her as an individual because she had different coloured shoes. And you know, they're not really criticising her. What they're trying to do is throw me off my guard. They're trying to upset me, and they're using her to do it. And I'll be honest, I find that despicable. I just find it absolutely abhorrent. It's just so far below the belt.
Did it work? Did it put you off?
Yeah. And it shouldn't have. But you can probably hear in the tone of my voice that it still angers me. But you know, they would do that anyway. It's all in the past.
It is.
One thing I am is I'm a very forgiving person. I don't hold grudges. I cannot hold a grudge. So even the people who've been the most abhorrent to me, I will not begrudge them going down, you know, into the future. I might be upset by incidents now because they still have some emotional resonance. But as time goes on, I let go of all that.
Let's turn the page. Let's talk about you mentioned new opportunities earlier on. I'm definitely interested in those. Before we do though, is there any part of you that says, I'm not done with politics?
I don't know yet. It's too soon to ask me. I only conceded defeat, 3 days ago?
That's right.
No, what I won't do is I won't critique the new council. No matter what the new council does, I will not publicly critique them. I think it's a really bad look. I'm not going to do a Kevin Rudd or a Tony Abbott, you know. I think it's a really bad look when a former leader spitefully critiques whoever it was that replaced them. So you won't see me doing that ever. And if anyone asks me in the coming years what I think of what council's doing, I won't be obliging and tell them. But that doesn't mean that, you know, down the track that I may not re-engage in politics in some way. It might take a different form. I don't know yet.
Will you? I know, as you say, you won't voice your thoughts, but will you keep a close eye on what council's doing?
Oh, look, I can't help but be passionately fascinated with whatever happens. And, you know, it's a whole new makeup of council. There's 3 new councillors, so and a new mayor. So the majority of the elected body is now new to the game of council. They're facing a very, very difficult task thanks to social isolation and the way council's now operating remotely to get up to speed without even being able to meet face-to-face with the majority of the staff, you know. It's going to be a very strange time for them. But, yes, I will be interested to see what happens because, you know, to some extent, some of the achievements over the last 4 years I consider to be part of my legacy for the Shire. So, of course, I can't help but be interested and see what happens to that in the coming 4 years. But as I say, I'll keep my opinions to myself.
Smart way to be. If only more people were like that, Tony.
Well, you hold me to it, mate. If in 2 years' time I suddenly say something, you say, you said to me.
Exactly. Well, let's talk about these new opportunities. As you say, it's only been a few days that you're not wearing the mayoral cap. But what's filling your days so far?
Tidying my office at home and my studio, my painting studio. That's what I did today. But look, I've always had little projects on the go. I just haven't had time for them. So there's a book project that I've been researching and begun writing a few years ago that I can now apply myself to more fully. There's always a painting on the easel. The one I'm looking at right now has been sitting there for about 6 months, but
Wow.
that means, you know, in a week I can probably get it finished. You know, I've always gone out. One of the things I do for solace is to go out usually on a Sunday morning early and photograph wildlife. So I'll continue doing my wildlife photography. I'm toying with the idea of maybe setting up a local wildlife database that people can access online. You know, I've got to let the dust settle, obviously, because being mayor was so time-consuming. But
Exactly.
so I haven't exactly planned an alternative future. I certainly would like in some way, and this goes back to your question about involving myself in politics, I'd like to be an advocate or continue to be an advocate for real climate action and also for a more humane approach to refugees. So I might find myself caught up in that sort of lobbying. And I also want to improve my double bass playing. I'll have more time to do that. So, yeah.
Wowee. If you weren't busy enough as mayor, you're going to be busy not being mayor, it sounds like.
Well, you know, I was, always, I had lots of irons in the fire before I took up politics. So I just need to rekindle that fire and breathe a bit of life back into it. I'm actually quite excited, I have to say, about being able to engage my creative self a bit more. Because although there's some degree of creativity in being a mayor, it's nothing like you know, making paintings and music and all of that sort of stuff. So,
well, if you don't mind me saying, and it sounds great, but if you don't mind me saying, I'm a massive advocate of the arts industry. I don't think we give it enough time or funding, for that matter. But none of those things you just mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong, will be your next career. Is there something, I know it's early days and maybe you haven't put much thought into it at all, but is there something that you think I could see myself doing this as a, you know, quote unquote 9 to 5?
Well, I've always done lots of things at once, though, you see. I mean, I've published 5 books. I've, you know, and I've done that whilst being a professional artist and being a professional photographer. So, you know, it depends on the climate of the day and what is likely to be successful and what opportunities come. So, you know, if I have an opportunity in 12 or 18 months to have a solo exhibition, then a lot of my focus will be on my painting once again. And there was a time, you know, before the GFC when I was shipping paintings all around the country to galleries in every state. And then the GFC kind of tidied that up a bit. So, you know, I'll just see how things pan out. It's about being open to opportunity and open to suggestions that fall in your lap in some ways. In the meantime, there's plenty to occupy my time.
Are you excited about this next chapter, or are you resentful that you're no longer mayor?
No, I'm actually excited. I mean, we talked a bit about some of the difficulties of being mayor. So there are things I won't miss. I won't miss being a focus of attention by people who love to hate me. I won't miss the fact that I have to watch my P's and Q's in public and always make sure that I dress neatly, and because I was representing the community wherever I went. So I can be a bit more relaxed now. I can probably drop in on a few people when I go surfing without getting into so much trouble.
That's right. Maybe give the finger a bit more often, Tony.
I've never resorted to that, I have to say.
What's the biggest thing you'll miss?
The biggest thing I'll miss is the people. One of the problems I've always found in the sort of pursuits that I've involved myself in the arts, once I left the film industry, and I was in the film business for 20 years, but working as an artist or author is a very lonely game. And the thing I love most about going to council were the wonderful people that I got to work with, and I'm mostly talking about staff here. The Noosa Council is full of very passionate, very intelligent, very professional people. Every one of them I absolutely adored to say hello to every day and to chat with, from, the front of house staff through to the directors. They were just such a pleasure to deal with. And the thing I will miss most is seeing them 5 days a week. It's just going to be hard. I miss them already.
I bet.
But anyway, the one thing is true, though, that is that as a mayor, as a former mayor, wherever I go out in public, people want to talk. Whereas before I was mayor, I wasn't really known in the community except by name. Now, because my face is known, if I go shopping or something like that, then people come up and chat, and that's lovely. That's really nice.
And local politics, that's a big part of your job too, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And, being there, being seen, going to community meetings, going to AGMs, going to changeover meetings. Yeah, absolutely. A big part of it is engaging in the community and making the community feel like, you're available to them. So, and I hope I did that reasonably well during my term as mayor. And the payoff is now that I have an enormous friendship base, if you like. There are so many lovely people now who I can talk to, meet up with, well, I will do one day when coronavirus is behind.
That's right. Well, Tony Wellington, speaking of being available, you've certainly appreciate your time for a chat today. Mate, last question as we finish up. Of all the things you've done in your time as mayor and your time in local politics, what for you will be the biggest legacy that you've left?
Oh, gee, I'd rather give you a list than one. But look, I think, being part of the de-amalgamation of Noosa was very significant. In terms of my time on council, one of the big legacy issues was probably the Ural Ringtail Wildlife Corridor project that's going to see 2,400 hectares of mostly what was plantation land converted back to native forest and added to the conservation estate. That's something that, generations for decades to come will be able to enjoy the benefits from. And hopefully I put the council on a really good footing in terms of being one of the most sustainable